It always starts the same way. Someone finds an animal alone, shivering, or too small to defend itself, and something in them refuses to walk past. They tell themselves it will only be for a few days, just until the creature is strong enough to survive on its own. But a few days turn into a few months, and a few months turn into years, and somewhere along the way the animal they rescued stops being the animal they remember. These are 10 stories of people who open their homes to something wild, never realizing that the softness they were looking at was only temporary. On a winter morning in rural Montana, a rancher named Dale found a lone pup curled against the wheel of his truck. Its mother was nowhere in sight, and with the temperature dropping fast, Dale assumed it was an abandoned husky mix and carried it inside. For the first year, the animal behaved like any working dog. It followed him through the barns, slept by the fireplace, and answered to its name. It was only when a neighbor with hunting experience saw the animal's gait and the shape of its skull that Dale learned the truth. He hadn't raised a husky. He had raised a gray wolf. By then the animal weighed over 100 pounds and had already begun testing the fence line at night, pacing for hours the way caged wolves do when instinct starts pulling against captivity. Wolves are not wired to accept a single human as an unquestioned leader forever. As pack instincts matured, the animal began challenging Dale physically, first through mock charges, then through real ones. A wildlife rescue eventually relocated the wolf to a sanctuary, but Dale later admitted that in the final weeks, he no longer felt safe walking to his own barn after dark. In a suburb outside Mumbai, a woman named Priya heard crying beneath her balcony one monsoon night. She climbed down to find a spotted cub, soaked and shivering, clearly separated from its mother during the storm. She wrapped it in a towel and kept it warm until morning, planning to hand it over to forest officials. But days passed, then weeks, and the cub grew comfortable in her home before anyone came to collect it. Priya kept it fed on milk and meat, and the animal responded to her voice, rubbing against her legs the way a house cat would. What she didn't fully register was that leopards are ambush predators built for solitary hunting, not domestic companionship. As the cub's teeth and claws developed, ordinary play began drawing blood. A swipe meant as affection could open a wound that needed stitches. Forest officials eventually intervened after neighbors reported the animal roaming the compound wall at night, its silhouette unmistakable even in the dark. Priya was fined for illegal possession of a protected species, and the leopard was transferred to a rehabilitation center that would attempt, with limited success, to reintroduce it to a life it had never truly learned how to live. Along the coast of Northern Ireland, a fisherman named Connor found a gray seal pup stranded far from the tide line, too young to have been weaned. Rather than call a marine rescue line, he brought it home in a bucket and raised it in a converted horse trough behind his cottage. For months, the pup was gentle, almost dog-like in its eagerness to be near him. What Connor underestimated was the raw physical power a mature seal develops. Adult gray seals can weigh over 300 pounds and possess a bite force strong enough to sever fingers, a trait built for crushing fish and defending territory against rivals. As the animal matured, its play grew rougher, and what had once been a gentle nudge became a bruising shove that once knocked Connor off his feet on the wet stone floor. The final incident came when the seal, startled by a visiting dog, lunged and bit down on Connor's forearm hard enough to require surgery. Marine biologists later explained that seals raised without contact with their own species often fail to develop the caution around humans that keeps wild encounters safe, making hand-raised seals unpredictable in a way wild ones rarely are. In a small town in the Philippines, a family discovered a young reticulated python curled beneath their rice storage shed. Rather than remove it, the father decided to keep it as what he called a natural form of pest control, and his 10-year-old son quickly grew attached, feeding it and letting it coil around his shoulders. For years, nothing went wrong, and the snake became something of a local curiosity, gentle enough that neighborhood children would visit just to see it. But reticulated pythons are among the longest snakes on Earth, capable of exceeding 20 feet and overpowering prey many times their own body weight through sheer constriction force. As the snake matured past 12 feet, its hunting instincts sharpened, and one evening, while being fed, It misjudged the boy's proximity and began to coil around his torso instead of the intended prey. It took 3 adults working together to unwind the snake's grip before serious injury occurred. The family surrendered the python to a wildlife rescue soon after, having realized that no amount of familiarity changes what an apex constrictor is built to do when its instincts take over. In a mountain town in British Columbia, a couple discovered a black bear cub wandering near their cabin after a wildfire had scattered local wildlife. Assuming its mother had died in the fire, they built a small pen in their yard and began feeding it, planning to release it once it was old enough to survive alone. The cub grew attached to the couple, following them around the property and even learning to open unlatched doors. What they hadn't planned for was how quickly a black bear's strength outpaces its manageability. By its 2nd year, the animal weighed close to 200 pounds and had developed the habit of standing on its hind legs to greet them, a gesture that once accidentally knocked the husband to the ground hard enough to fracture his wrist. Wildlife officers eventually intervened, explaining that bears raised in close human contact often lose their natural fear of people entirely, a trait that makes them far more likely to approach strangers and far more likely to be euthanized as a result. The cub was relocated to a specialized sanctuary rather than released, since a bear with no fear of humans cannot safely be returned to the wild. A shop owner in rural Texas found a spotted kitten near his warehouse loading dock and assumed it belonged to a feral domestic litter nearby. He brought it inside, fed it, and let it roam freely among the shelves. Weeks later, a visiting wildlife officer recognized the rosette pattern immediately. It was not a domestic kitten but an ocelot, a wild cat native to the region's remaining brushland. Ocelots are solitary, territorial hunters, and even hand-raised individuals retain instincts that make them unpredictable around unfamiliar people and animals. As the animal matured, it began marking territory throughout the warehouse and reacted with sudden aggression whenever new employees entered its space, something the owner hadn't anticipated from an animal that had once slept curled in his lap. Ocelots are also protected under both state and federal law, meaning the man's unintentional rescue placed him at risk of serious legal consequences before the animal was surrendered to a licensed wildlife facility equipped to handle a full-grown wild cat. Near a river delta in Louisiana, a woman named Denise found an otter pup separated from its family during a flood surge. She kept it in a converted bathtub, feeding it fish and letting it play in her pool, charmed by how quickly it learned to recognize her voice. Otters are intelligent and highly social, which made the bond feel especially real, but that same intelligence made the animal difficult to contain as it matured. River otters have sharp, curved teeth built for crushing shellfish and defending territory against other otters, and as this one reached full size, its play bites grew harder, eventually drawing blood during what looked like ordinary roughhousing. The turning point came when the otter, startled by a delivery driver at the front door, latched onto the man's ankle and would not release its grip for nearly a full minute. Wildlife officials explained that otters raised without other otters often fail to learn bite inhibition, the natural restraint wild pups develop through play with their own kind, leaving hand-raised individuals with no built-in sense of how hard is too hard. An egg farmer in the Karoo region of South Africa found an abandoned ostrich chick after a storm scattered a wild breeding pair's nest. He raised it alongside his chickens, and for the first year it behaved like an oversized, oddly affectionate bird, following the farmer's children around the yard. What the family hadn't accounted for was the sheer physical danger a mature ostrich represents. Adult ostriches can reach speeds of over 40 miles per hour and deliver a forward kick powerful enough to break bone, a defense mechanism evolved to fend off lions on the open savanna. As the bird matured into breeding age, it became increasingly territorial, particularly around the farmer's youngest son, whom it seemed to perceive as a rival rather than a familiar face. One afternoon, the ostrich delivered a kick to the boy's leg that fractured it in 2 places, an injury that finally convinced the family the bird needed to be relocated to a dedicated ostrich farm with proper enclosures and trained handlers. In a high-rise apartment in São Paulo, a man named Rafael bought what he believed was an ordinary pet lizard from an unlicensed street vendor, only to watch it grow into something entirely different. Within a year, The animal had reached nearly 4 feet in length, and Raphael realized, almost too late, that he was housing a spectacled cayman, a crocodilian relative capable of powerful bites and explosive underwater speed. He kept it in a converted bathroom filled with several inches of water, feeding it raw meat and fish. For a time, the animal tolerated his presence, allowing him to clean its enclosure without incident. But caymans do not form the kind of trust-based bonds that mammals do. Their tolerance is not affection, and it can end without warning. During a routine cleaning, the cayman lunged and clamped onto Raphael's forearm, requiring emergency surgery to repair torn tendons. Brazilian wildlife authorities confiscated the animal, noting that caymans purchased through unlicensed trade are almost always taken illegally from wild nesting sites, making Raphael's apartment pet both a personal danger and part of a much larger conservation problem. The most extreme case on this list comes from a private reserve bordering a national park in Zimbabwe, where a conservation-minded family took in an orphaned elephant calf after poachers killed the rest of its herd. Unlike the other animals on this list, elephants are extraordinarily intelligent and emotionally complex, capable of grief, memory, and deep social bonding, which made the family's attachment to the calf, whom they named Themba, feel less like keeping an exotic pet and more like raising a member of the family. For years, Themba followed the family everywhere, greeting them with trunk touches and staying close enough to sleep near their home. But male elephants undergo a hormonal period called must as they reach maturity, during which testosterone levels can spike to many times their normal level, triggering aggression that even experienced handlers struggle to predict or control. When Themba entered must for the first time at full adult size, weighing over 5 tons, the calm, familiar animal the family had raised became unrecognizable, charging vehicles and destroying fencing that had stood untouched for a decade. The family made the difficult decision to transition Themba to a supervised bull enclosure at a nearby reserve, acknowledging that the bond they shared, however real, could never override an instinct millions of years in the making. It remains one of the clearest reminders on this list that love and familiarity are not the same as safety, and that some animals, no matter how gently they were raised, never stop being exactly what nature built them to be. Every story here began with the same instinct, the desire to save something small and helpless. And in almost every case, that instinct wasn't wrong. What changed was time. An animal that fits in your hands today may not fit in your life 5 years from now, and by the time that becomes obvious, the bond is already impossible to walk away from cleanly. If there's one thread connecting all 10 of these stories, it's this. Compassion is not the same as capability, and knowing the difference is sometimes the only thing standing between a rescue story and a tragedy.